talk about revolution, oh, that's fine. But what are you going to be doing come the time?
So Penny, how did it start? What led up to Crass forming?
Well, I mean, I'm sure anyone who knows about Crass, there's going to be repeats in all of this. I apologise for that, and it always takes me a little bit of time to warm up because really there's no story. I mean, if you live a life, you live a life, and things happen, and that's what happened with Crass. I mean, it wasn't contrived. I didn't wake up one morning and think, gosh, I'd like to be in a punk band. Any more than 20 years earlier, I'd woken up and thought I wanted to be a painter. I've lived a creative life. To my mind, creativity, the first essential of creativity, I've always felt really since I was a kid, is the creative process of sharing. That's the first. After that, then you can start deciding what to do. I loathe the whole cult of personality. I feel, one of the reasons I feel comfortable coming up to work with Russ is just because I like Russ. I don't do many of these sorts of things because I actually rather detest the idea of elderly gentlemen talking about their experiences. That doesn't really interest me. What really interests me is how what the shared experience of life, and to express that in some way through, in my case, writing or drawing or making music. A huge amount of what we did as a band was simply an attempt to share our life. Obviously, I remember saying very early on, that we can't actually share the house. The house has always been a communal house for 40 years. Any number of projects have come out of there. Crass is the most known of them, but there's been many more. Stonehenge was another one. The first Stonehenge festivals was another project that came out of the house. And all of them have been designed about the purpose of bringing people together, not necessarily under any sort of political cause, but quite simply to find a life of their own choice. So that was the driving force. Now, there was one period in my life where I thought, bloody hell, it's actually happening, and that was when I think I first heard a Pistols record, and I thought, Jesus, something's going to happen here. I mean, it wasn't very long before I realised nothing at all was, and actually it was just another part of the sort of rock and roll circus. One of the most unpleasant ones, I think, because it contrived authenticity and actually screwed people a lot more badly. One doesn't mind David Bowie getting out of his sort of private jet and talking about what he's going to do. I rather resent Joe Strummer getting out of his private Mercedes or whatever it was and then telling us how we ought to live our lives.
They said that we were trash. Well, the name is Crass, not Clash. They can stuff their punk credentials. It's them that take the cash. They won't charge nothing for their festival talk. RAR badges in their protest wall.
As with any project, it was the result of the personalities involved. I know Steve, who was a young kid from Dagenham, from a working class background. I knew him slightly before. He was the brother of one of the sort of older people around my age who, roughly the villagers always had names for us. We're still the students over the hill, although I'm now 64. At that time, we were the students over the hill, but hippies, and then we became punks. I'm not quite sure what we've become now. But Steve was the younger brother of a guy who used to come over, in the hippie era of the house. And he was pissed off as well. We were pissed off in our very different ways, but we did realise there was a sort of common element between us, and we were both pissed off. And that's really why it happened, nothing more than that. We certainly had no concept whatsoever of ever becoming a band, with any sort of the trappings of being a band. We certainly never for 1 minute had any ambition. We simply, the two of us for about 3 months used to go into the little sort of music studio back at home and just muck about, basically. And then other people would come by and say, cool, can I join in? And it didn't matter whether they could do anything. I mean, that seemed pointless to sort of say, well, to do sort of tests. you know, if someone said they wanted to play guitar, they did. And Andy, who was, you know, our rhythm guitarist, never ever learned what a chord was in the 7 years we were on the road and wasn't actually very interested, but he did a spectacular job of making a good noise.
So when did it become a band? Did it become a band when you decided to go and play outside the rehearsal room, or?
I think it really became a band when other people decided that's what it was.
Right.
And I think we were a bit surprised. I know that sounds a bit sort of glib, but
Right.
you know, I'd had a band called Exit before Crass, which was a completely avant-garde outfit, and sometimes there was anything up to 40 people, and we'd turn up at universities usually, because their security wasn't very good, and just move in and do a gig in say, like, you know, where people are in the refectory. And sometimes people didn't even notice we were doing it, and other times we'd sort of empty the place. But basically speaking, we'd always done this sort of like guerrilla music, just going out and doing it and seeing what happened. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the extraordinary thing is, generally speaking, absolutely nothing happened. No one even noticed there was a band sort of doing whatever it was in the corner. They were all just drinking their drink and going home, which is sort of nice. And it happened with Crass for quite a while as well. I mean, we certainly weren't what we ended up as. I mean, we emptied places regularly initially, which to me seemed a sign that we must be doing something right. So there was no sense of, I mean, eventually we started having to become organised. Certainly for the first year, we were just fucking about, and that was that, you know, and certainly with no idea as to what or why. Why should we? It was people sharing a common interest and having fun. And it was fun initially.
Did you ever think, oh, we're getting better? Was that ever in your consciousness?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's not my interest. You are not better in the sense of, you know, because better has to be, you know, measured against something. And quite frankly, I've never really been very interested in rock and roll. I don't particularly like rock and roll. I've always had an interest in, well, since I was a kid, I've been very interested in jazz. I really love modern jazz, and I like European classical avant-garde music, so I've never really got off a big deal on jazz. And actually there's far more in Crass which, you know, owed itself to that interest than to, you know, sort of like trying to do imitations of the Sex Pistols or something. I basically thought were, you know, in terms of rock and roll, we're a very good rock and roll band, but, you know, imaginative, not. So I think that what we were trying to do within, you know, as we realised we could actually do something or other, I think what we tried to do is to extend our expression. So you know, we'd look at what the lyrics were about and try to create atmospheres in much the same way as sort of opera or, you know, rock and roll tends not to do that. It just makes a, you know, has your lead guitar, and it's not really sensitive to the nature of the lyric. And I mean, to us it was very important to be sensitive to the nature of the lyric, that you know, the sort of chords and things of which we didn't understand, but we would say, well, that should be angular or muddy or something. We used all those terms and then found how we could create those atmospheres. And I think that in that sense we were sort of reasonably unique, because most other people were just going for sort of formulaic 4/4, whatever all that stuff is, you know, 3-chord wonders. Well, I mean, we were 1,008-chord wonders because we didn't know what any chord was anyway, so. We'd done 1 or 2 squat gigs, and I think we'd even done some sort of radio show because someone had said, oh, you know, whatever, you know, it just happened. And then there used to be a guy who visited Dial House who used to, is this boring? I mean, one of the things which I need to know, if you want me to go off another tax, please do. I've heard my voice all my life, and it can get gruesome for me. Yeah, there was a guy who used to do window displays, and he happened to be going by. He used to call down and sort of, you know, like sit around as people do at home. And he said, could he have a tape of what we were doing? Because we'd got a little one of those little 2-track things, little cassette player, which we'd done some recordings, and he took it into Small Wonder Records, and Pete at Small Wonder really loved it. I mean, that wasn't why we'd done it for our own amusement, and we really didn't think, I mean, it was quite a shock to us when someone from, you know, the music world, although Pete turned out not to be from the music world at all, but I mean, that's what it felt like us, and I mean, it was quite shocking, the idea of sort of suddenly, well, frankly, being taken seriously. So he asked us in to his offices, and we visited, and he wanted us to do a single, and I think we'd got a set of maybe 15 songs by then, and he was saying, well, no, you've got to choose the one, and he was saying, well, we can't tell the difference, they're all, you know, what we do, why can't we just put it all out as a single? And the result of that was the first ever 45 RPM 12-inch single, which actually isn't, it's sort of like a high-speed album. I think we did it live, there was no overdubbing, we just went and did it. And we did it like we did a set, in the order that we did a set. There was, you know, there was, I don't think, I mean, I think I can honestly say there was no contrivance at all at that stage of our musical career. In Exit, the guy who used to do the sound next, a guy called John Loader. I hadn't actually seen him for years. I found that he was living in Wood Green. I went round to Wood Green, and by then he was doing advertising jingles on a 4-track, I think. And I said, John, you know, how about doing some, you know, recording of the band? So he said yes, and actually he got an 8-track. I mean, he was doing very nicely, thank you, doing advertising jingles. But because of our old thing with Exit, which was that band that used to go around, you know, the guerrilla warfare in the university band, and he enjoyed that, he thought it was fun, so he actually bought an 8-track, and I think that's what we did Feeding on, as I recall. So he became, I can't remember, I think the 8th or 9th member of the band. We didn't do deals with people, you know, so that meant that he got a 9th of what we got. But as it was usually very little or nothing, then he didn't get anything at all. But he didn't mind that because it was fun. Eventually he ended up as a multi-millionaire, which proves that fun can make money too.
but not through you.
No.
Okay, well that's the You said you signed with Small Wonder to do this.
We didn't sign with Small
You
Wonder.
didn't?
No, we just did a record with them.
That was it. And that was a way a lot of bands were going at the time, wasn't it? Just to work with smaller labels like that.
Yeah, I mean there was Rough Trade and Small Wonder in London, and then there was a Cartel. I think Red Rhino, was it Red Rhino was one of them?
Yep, Red Rhino up in York, yeah.
Yeah, and there's sort of like dotted across. Now I think it's a really powerful thing because it was very much about local people doing local things and it being local. And I think
joining up.
Yeah, and it was fabulous. So there was this little internet of people, a true internet or interconnection of people. It was very effective, and it also meant that, you know, that those areas became sort of self-financing in both a creative and an economic way. I mean, it was called the Feeding of the 5,000 because actually that was the minimum we could get pressed, and actually it was about sort of 4,999 more than we thought we'd sell, I have to say that. What happened was that there was the first track on this, which was a thing called Reality Asylum, which was a sort of it was an attack on the institutionalization of Christianity, on sort of false morality. I mean, some people saw it as a direct attack on Christ. Well, look, Christ is used as a symbol in it, but actually it's a direct attack on sort of Christian morality, which I think just cripples the soul. It doesn't open up the soul, I believe it cripples it.
I am no feeble Christ, not me. He hangs in glib delight upon his cross, above my body. Christ, forgive, forgive. I vomit for you, Jesu. Shit, forgive. Down now from your cross. Down now from your papal heights, from that churlish suicide.
When we'd recorded the album, we sent it off to, I think, an Irish pressing plant who sent it back immediately. It said, you've got to be joking, we're not touching that. And then we couldn't find anyone to press it. neither could we find anyone to print the cover, you know, including the lyrics. So we had to release the first one with, you know, I think it's called Sound of Free Speech, and it was a 4-minute, in those days we were told we got a 4-minute warning, you know, the bombs from Russia took 4 minutes to get here, so we did a 4-minute silence, you know, in place of the piece that no one would touch. Compromise number one, maybe, I don't know. What we did do is offer to send cassettes to anyone of the track if they could be bothered to write to us. And actually we spent the next sort of 3 months, someone was upstairs doing cassettes, you know, for the next 3 months to send them this forbidden track. Well, that was the first little bit of problems we got. Well, then Peter Small Wonder got visited by the Vice Squad. There's a sort of bit of a amusing story on that, because we got a phone call from, I think it was from him or his missus, saying the Vice Squad's coming round to see you. Well, you know, in those days, all bands were called that sort of thing, whether they were called sort of, you know, UK trash or, you know, whatever it was. So we thought, oh, I wonder what sort of band they are, you know, Vice Squad coming round. Well, it actually turned out to be Scotland Yard Vice Squad. And I think it's pretty strange, because the two guys who turned up were actually, their specialisation was porn, you know. They spent most of their time going around Soho busting pawn shops. And they didn't know what the fuck they were doing there, you know. They'd been told to come out and sort of arrest these criminal anarchists, and they turned up and we offered them tea. I mean, we had taken the precaution of setting up a hidden microphone in the room where the interview was going to take place, and also of having an extremely good lawyer in the back. However, they turned up and couldn't make head nor tail of anything. But the net result of that was that Pete Small Wonder's little setup in Walthamstow, which was about 20 miles closer to London, was under threat. I mean, basically he'd got a sort of, you know, in those days, smoking dope was sort of still frowned on, still was sort of could put you in shit creek, and he enjoyed his dope. And it just seemed really unfair, you know, this guy who'd helped us, to have him being landed with, you know, these Vice Squad people coming around and bugging him. So we thought, well, we'll withdraw, we'll pull out from his setup and set up our own thing. So we borrowed some money. We had actually started recording a second album with him, which is called Stations of the Crass. And so we borrowed some money from another band, did the same thing, pressed 5,000. I think in the first week or two we'd sold 20,000, and suddenly we got bin loads of money. I mean, it was just ridiculous. I can't remember the sequence now. At the same time, we re-recorded the band track from the first record, and actually, I think, you know, made quite a few artistic improvements. You know, spent a lot of time on it, in fact, making it into a much more demanding piece, and then backed it with another single and put out, I think it was our first single, proper 7-inch single.
Shaved women collaborator!
You know, and this was going against the Director of Public Prosecution's, you know, very strict warning that we'd better fucking watch it, because they, after the Vice Squad had come, they were going to do us for criminal blasphemy. That was over our heads for about 6 months, and then they eventually dropped the case, but with, you know, stern warning. So the stern warning was enough to inspire us to go out and re-record it and put it out in a better format. Warnings I see as a license. Whenever anyone says don't, it always to me suggests do, and that's been another part of my own creative life. The more the gates are closed, the more I want to leap over them and see what's on the other side of them.
So what did it actually entail when you decided to go from not putting out the next record, Stations of the Crass, or Small Wonder, to doing it yourself? Did people take on roles and responsibilities within the band for doing certain things, or how did it work, or did everybody do a bit of everything? What happened?
Well, there were things we all shared. I mean, for example, I think it was probably the first 20,000 of those that we had to hand fold those things. They're big gatefolds, 6-fold. We'd have a day or 2 days a week folding these bloody things. I mean, a whole room full of them. Other days, by then, as things develop, we'd have days when Tuesdays, I think, was letter writing. We used to get sort of like a sack of mail a week, and that went on and on. Wednesdays was open to any visitor who wanted to come and talk. Generally speaking, they're from fanzines. The people who weren't invited or were told to piss off was the music press. Well, that was another tactic, because we decided, well, if we don't do as we realised we were getting what consensually might be described as power, we thought, well, how can we use this? And one way was if we don't do any interviews with the established press, and we do it with small fanzines, then the only way people are going to get to know about us is through having to buy the small fanzine. So by that means, we were massively contributing to the growth of the fanzine thing without having to do anything. All we had to do was to tell Paul Denoy to piss off. We weren't interested in talking to NME, which wasn't very difficult. Then all the rest happened, and suddenly there were, that was a huge contribution without doing anything to this sort of growth of what was massively important. A lot of people couldn't afford to go out and buy a guitar or a drum kit or even think about doing that. But everyone could sit down with a piece of paper and scatter away on it and put out 6 fanzines. Even if it was 6, it was their expression, and that's what's important. And I really think that, and we didn't say, oh no, we only do interviews with fanzines with an established, 5, No, it was like, what do you do? 1 postcard? Great, yeah, come around on Wednesday. Because the important thing always is to sort of give. What creativity is about giving, I think.
You started putting out records with other artists, didn't you? Was Honey Bee?
Well, it was after this one when we'd priced the thing, and we always sold it about, I think, 1/3 the price of anyone else. I mean, this one's got pay no more than £3. Well, that was a double album, and it was probably cheaper than that when that first came out. I don't know, maybe not, but we always sold things at way below anything else. Not because we were trying to be clever or do cut prices, because we didn't need the money. So you don't go selling things for tons of money, and knowing that most of the people who are buying your stuff haven't got a great deal of money, you sell it at what you need. And what we needed, we've got a nice vegetable patch, so we don't really need to go out and buy vegetables. We don't eat meat, so that's an expensive one. Blah, blah, blah. So our needs were very limited. So we shared that privilege, some people might say, or luxury, others might say, or others might say fucking hardship, however you want to put it, with other people. And so we'd sort of reckon, well, we'll make, the recording costs and the production costs and everything, plus enough to pay next week's rent or whatever, or probably more than that in all honesty, but we weren't very organised about it. And anyway, because it sold 20,000 or whatever it was in 2 weeks, we'd suddenly got fucking bins of money and really didn't know what to do with it. So the obvious thing was to do, there were people around who were doing their own music. The very first single we did was with Honey Bee. And she was a young girl who'd been through, a whole series of institutions all her life, was, one of life's great sufferers, people who just can't manage in this system.
Did you invite bands to send you tapes and stuff like that?
Well, it initially came because we were getting so many tapes. I mean, it was, again, sort of sackloads of tapes, because people realised we were doing stuff by other bands, so they just started sending us stuff of what they were doing. And, out of respect, we listened to everything.
Don't wanna fight for you! Try to escape. Won't fight for my life. And I just
And suddenly we realised, well, actually, this is real punk. This is real music. You know, it's sort of like commercial blues, for example, is a lovely example of what wasn't blues. You know, blues is what you found in the woodshed, or, you know, some guy sitting on his balcony, you know, talking about the things that mattered that day. Some of it could be transferred onto vinyl, and I'm really glad it was, but it isn't actually blues, I don't think. Likewise, I don't actually think we were punk. The real punks were these guys. Those are the guys I loved. Those are the guys I respected. I mean, most of it sounded fucking terrible. But they were that was the essence of it. It's our music. We're taking it back. You can stuff your sort of commercial standards, your commercial attitudes. We're having fun in Dad's garage, and no one's going to stop us.
So why weren't you punk then?
Because we moved out of that. You know, Steve and myself stopped being just a couple of guys getting very, very pissed and stoned, you know, for a while, in our back room, and actually moved out from that. I'm not saying, as I say, I'm glad we did, and I think we were able to bring that ethos out, but there's no question that ethos is ever so slightly watered down at each stage. And I think the beautiful thing about that bullshit stuff is the sort of absolute sincerity. You know, that absolute sincerity of the first time you say you love a girl, or the other way around, love a man, whatever. That sort of, you never feel that again because you become experienced with it. And that's sort of something so beautiful about the rawness of so much. I mean, yeah, there was one or two people who maybe were sort of taking the piss a bit, but I don't think there was many of them. I realised I was in New York in November, and, you know, I really love jazz, so I went along to check out the New York jazz clubs. Well, I don't have that sort of money. I can't spend £45 to go to listen to some guy. I just can't do it. You know, I love the music, but I can't do it. So I was spending my time doing what people who don't have money do, wandering around Central Park, or, wow, what's that noise? Some guy leaning up against a tree playing jazz. Not playing money, playing jazz. Go down the Bowery. Another guy, what's that noise? Jazz. Well, I think punk's the same thing. I think any real music is the same thing. Music is of the people. It has to be of the people. If it isn't of the people, then generally speaking, one of the things I loathe about so much pre-20th century art and music is it was for the wealthy. It was all to do with fucking courts or churches or, you know, fuck what you think. This is art. And I think one of the beautiful things about the 20th century is the reclamation of that. I think more and more people are saying, well, they can just fuck off. You know, Banksy is a lovely example, you know, of saying, sod your galleries, I'm doing on the wall. And if you want to pay me, you know, £300 million for one, here it is. Lovely, that's nice. And then I know the guy personally, you know, then he'll wade that into some other project. I think he just put on a show in Los Angeles, which is I think I'm right in saying it's one of the most attended and biggest money-making art show that's ever been put on in Los Angeles. And the whole lot, I mean, he made, I think it was 2 million or more out of it, and the whole lot went to Africa, for example. Well, that's creative, truly creative. You know, and sod Bono and his fucking sort of... Do I need to say more?
You know, I talk a lot with bands about artwork and thinking about how they want to be perceived. What's artwork all about for you? Because it's a really, really strong part of the identity of Crass. You know, you're cited, I think, in No Logo as one of the earlier
creators of Logo, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And brand identity, and bizarrely, paradoxically, maybe there is a really strong brand identity.
Oh yeah, there is. I mean, I think it comes from a profound belief that everything is art, everything is beautiful, everything requires care, everything requires love, and it doesn't matter what that is, whether it's making bread or digging the allotment or whatever you do in life, if you're not doing it with love and care, why bother to do it? I mean, what's the fucking point? And I have really if something isn't, I can't eat, I find it quite difficult to eat in restaurants because you're not eating food, you're eating money. Occasionally they've got someone there who actually cares about the food and not the money, but the general picture is certainly with any chain thing, McDonald's, you're eating money. Well, I mean, who wants to eat money? You know, I prefer to eat shit. I'm sure there's more sort of food value in it. And so it's that sort of sense that if anything you do, getting up this morning, if I couldn't get up this morning with sort of love and care, then why bother to get up? And so that's what, I mean, yes, we were fortunate in that G, who was I was at art school with her, phenomenal, talented, amazing artist. But whereas most phenomenal, amazing, talented artists of that calibre would now be sort of selling out to Saatchi and Saatchi or putting on fucking great big shows in Bond Street or whatever, you know, G's still struggling. You know, she's still penniless, she still, you know, lives in the same house as I do, because she actually believes in what she's doing. She actually thinks it's too precious to sell to rich people. You know, she has been offered huge amounts of money for a lot of this Crass stuff, and she always just says, no, fuck off. But she's perfectly happy to give it to someone who she likes. And that's another statement of the same thing, being careful about one's own life. And I think that, I'm sounding a bit preachy, and I'm sorry, but I just do believe that. If it doesn't come from the heart and if it doesn't touch the soul, then why bother with it? You know, we're only around once, aren't we? So, and it is actually a very beautiful place, if only we could see it. And the only reason we can't see it is because we get sort of veiled over with all this sort of corrupt stuff which stops us seeing it. We developed the logo thing, which we said, you know, and everything was contained in this. And if you like, that maybe was a sort of marketing ploy, and it worked. The moment someone saw, you know, the stencil lettering in a circle, da-di-da-di-da, they knew it was one of ours and they wanted it because it was one of ours. Well, that's great. So we were able to put out stuff by poets, for example, who no punk would ever want. And in fact, we got a good few of them back saying, what the fuck's this? This ain't punk. But it enabled us to move the stuff. I mean, I have to say there was only 2 bands, I think, that ever actually made money. And they were Conflict and Flux of Pink Indians, and everyone else we're still not. Even with Bjork, you know, with Kukul, who we did 2 albums with, we didn't actually ever make any money out of it, interestingly enough. Now, a lot of the people that we asked along, you know, didn't really know, you know, how to deal with the gear, and that's how I ended up producing, because actually I could be there and help them get the sound they wanted. Saddens me a great deal. I don't know whether any of you know, there's a book come out called The Day the Country Died or something or other, and that's interviews with masses of bands, and a lot of them are the bands that I actually work with, and it's quite a consistent, didn't like his sound. Well, I wasn't fucking Phil Spector. All I was doing was someone in there trying to say, well, look, that's what you move if you want to make it sound like that. I did my very best, and it did a little bit upset me, a bit self-pitying, I know, that, you know, I wasn't getting, you know, Phil Spector sound. Well, sorry. But, so, yeah, so the condition was 1 7-inch, if possible, in on the Saturday, record on the Saturday, mix on the Sunday, and then we'll do all the rest. You know, you supply the artwork, we'll, you know, recommend, da-da-da-da, and that's it, and then it goes out. Well, that seemed to us like a great idea, because it wasn't sort of saying we're a record label, it was saying, this, we'll show you how to do it, and you might make some bit of money out of it. And as I say, very few people did. I mean, they used to get little bits and pieces, but nothing, you know, that you could describe as money. Well, we started realising that this was maybe a bit unfair, you know, because some of them were really young bands, you know, they got no resources whatsoever. And so maybe we were creating false expectations for them. So we set up another label called Corpus Christi, which we actually gave to John Loder, and said, John, you manage this, do what you feel is right. We're not in a position, we don't want to define all this. You set deals up, you do whatever you like. And it was great, and a lot of bands actually came, I mean, the whole One Little Indian thing came through exactly that. They were a band called Flux of Pink Indians, who we did one single with. They then went to John. Well, what John did in their case was to offer them something outside of Corpus Christi, which was, you know, their own label. And out of that, you know, became another empire, run by
Derek Burkett.
Derek Burkett, of which I'm terribly envious. Not. And also the other thing we were able to do is there was a degree, inevitably, of political and ideological condition on, you know, like obviously we weren't going to ask some Nazi band to do a record on our label, and we never had that problem, but we were aware that people might want to say more, might want to sort of expand. I mean, Conflict, they were a band who took a considerably more aggressive stance than we did. And whereas on Crass Records, I might have felt uncomfortable about that and tried to sort of like calm it down a bit. When they went on to Corpus Christi, they were, you know, completely free to, you know, say what the fuck they wanted, and they did, and that was great. But they weren't then within the, you know, that sort of very specific framework of our label. So the label was an ideological thing. It wasn't obviously it wasn't a commercial thing. Initially, we said we would never play outside a 20-mile radius of Dial House because we didn't want to impose or to change the sort of cultural development of any part of the country. And it took about a year and a half before we actually decided, well, maybe we can do something. Maybe by then we were getting sort of audiences. And we thought, well, okay, so if we go out and play somewhere like Cleator Moor in Cumbria, then maybe some people will come along and maybe we'll make a bit of money and maybe we can invest that into that area or give it to the people. Invest, what does that mean? Put it away. And that's what we eventually did. We as we got a bigger and bigger audience, we realized that, you know, we could actually really contribute economically and creatively to the development of areas right across Britain. But I mean, I have to say, within that, you know, I continue to have doubts about playing anywhere more than the 20-mile radius, because the problems were so different. You know, like I remember playing up in Perth and not really understanding that you know, Perth has got the same sort of problems as Northern Ireland had. I didn't know about that shit. You know, so here we are, you know, Crass, the big political wise boys. Well, I didn't know fuck all about the Orange movement in Scotland at that time. And it's very dangerous. We decided not to go on playing abroad. We did 2 tours very early on in Holland and Germany. And on one of the German gigs, there was a bit of a kerfuffle going on outside. We went out and there was a whole line of police cars with guys behind, you know, police behind them with guns pointing at the entrance to the gig. 1 or 2 sort of pretty pissed punks lobbing things every so often and just not knowing what to do. Well, that's very dangerous. We'd created the situation by putting on a gig there, and lots and lots of people turned up at it, but politically we didn't know what to do, because there I don't think it's cool to sort of stroll over and have a little chat with the police when you don't get across the yard even, or so I was informed. And it was just a very uncomfortable situation. So
but at that time people did just ring you up, like the reference to Cleator Moor. Obviously, I know the guy who asked. But so people would just ring you up and say, "Why don't you come up and play up here?" And you would often say, "Well, you sort of set a gig then," or.
Well, absolutely. That's always how we operated. I mean, we also very early. I mean, we did do 1 or 2 commercial gigs initially in London. I was there was a place called the Moonlight Club, And they were always crap, you know. They always wanted to sort of stick the disco on sort of half a second after you'd finished your set, which meant no one could chat. I mean, the whole point of a gig wasn't us getting on the stage, it was the fact that we could get off the stage and chat to people. You know, you travel 15 miles, you don't want to be doing what you can do at home, you want to be chatting. And one of the lovely things about the band is it would bring people from all over Britain and, you know, people from further, and we could get the music out of the way and then let's have a good old chat and a bowl of soup, and that's how it was. And one of the principles, again, that we very, very early on decided is to play no commercial gigs. If someone wanted and it got around, you know, say someone in Blackburn wanted us to play in Blackburn, they'd ring up and say, you know, why don't you play in Blackburn? And we'd say, well, why don't you organise it? And, well, because I can't. And, well, of course you can. Go down the Scout Hut. Are you a member of a youth club or whatever? You know, don't go to the commercial clubs. We won't do that. You just look around. Go to the Working Man's Club and ask whether they'd mind putting up with us for the evening. And it happened. It was great. You know, we played in Nissen huts, and I remember playing in this little Welsh chapel, you know, right in the middle of the hills. I don't think it was a town for 15 miles, but there must have been 500 people there. It was fantastic. Just sort of group of people just moving around, having a good time, realising that you don't need all that commercial crap to have a good time. And we always supplied very good soup, I have to say that. My piss-off was, as the drummer, as I'm sure any of you who play know, the drummer has to spend hours setting up. So normally by the time I'd finished setting up, all the bloody soup had gone, whereas the guitarists would sort of do their little, you know, bit and get the soup, because there'd always be lines of Mohicans waiting for their bowl.
How did you feel when you started seeing, when you did gigs, people walking around wearing black, wearing that logo all the time? Did you feel like you created some kind of cult? Or?
I remember the first time it happened, and we were doing a gig at the Conway Hall in central London. And up until that time, you know, we were doing gigs and we were getting a good few people turning up. But something happened, and there was this gig when all these people were wearing black. We decided to wear black, you know, well, I won't go into it, it's a long story, but I mean, basically because it just, we were really tired of all that sort of punk coquetry, you know, that sort of shit, you know, Vivienne Westwood, you know, what's the next thing, you know, it was sort of leopard skin last week, it better be fluffy pink this week or whatever. And that's why we adopted black, not so we could either look like anarchists or Nazis or anything else. It was just a way of saying, oh, fuck off with your fashion, you know, if I just wear black, you might not even notice me. It certainly wasn't any sort of style thing. It was also very convenient because it meant we could wash all the same clothes and they'd come out the washing machine the same sort of... that's an old one, I'm getting bored with that one. Anyway, well, it was utterly shocking. I mean, I remember it happening, and there was all these, you know, youngish people coming in, sort of wearing black and with bits of, you know, logo on them, and just really being frightened and thinking, what the fucking hell is this? You know, sort of like, we've created a private army. Are we creating a private army? And actually, it's something that never lost in the sort of 7 years that we were on the road. It was a constant question that we had to ask ourselves. Have we created a private army? And we had to keep kicking it out. I mean, after we'd done Stations, which very much sort of put us in the sort of boot boy department of punk, we were much louder, much faster, much more aggressive than any other band that had probably ever come on the scene.
The bastard! What are they playing at? Don't lot of music, don't lot of words, don't lot of silly much to keep it for the birds and bees. Boys, giving you the chance to be a plastic rap. Round a doggy's meat can full of fucking crap. Making little darlings, don't tell you it's a boy. Baby, mama, tender, love to bring you lots of joy.
Well, the next album we did was, you know, what I regard as probably the greatest feminist album that's ever been recorded. Well, probably one of the only feminist albums that's ever been recorded, which looks purely at feminist issues. It doesn't just use feminism as a way of expressing rock and roll. it looks at rock and roll as a way of expressing feminism. And I actually think it was probably the most profound thing we ever did.
I've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I've got a red pair of high heels on. Strap my ankles, break my heels. Make me kneel, make me feel. Turn, turn, turn like a clockwork dog. Put in your key and give me a whirl. Tease me, the reason to play my red high heels. I can't get away. I'll be your
I actually think most anyone else in rock and roll would have said, wow, this is a good formula, stick with this, you know, get rid of the girls, with, you know, tell them to fuck off and get on with the sort of real business. The women in the group were always, from the very start, a massively powerful voice. The sensitivity of the band was constantly being challenged by the women in the band, who at that, you know, initially didn't actually do anything in the band. They were just hanging around as part of the community. They were hanging around sounds insulting, but we all hung around. The only thing that I think was predictable about our band was that it was its predictable unpredictability. You know, so the moment anyone thought they got a grip on it, you know, like they thought they got a grip, oh, the Boot Boys. You know, the next one is, you know, a feminist statement. So always we'd be turning corners. You know, I can't remember the sequence, but we did one massively produced album.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Christ! It's
Crass.
Five on stop, you've heard it all before. Press B, press the best, the music for. We ain't gonna hear much, we don't know it at all. Feel like fucking like it, fuck it up!
And that again, people were saying, oh, you're really sounding good, like, you know, that's sounding good, that's good rock and roll and all that sort of crap. Well, they couldn't have said anything worse, because the next one was the most unlistenable thing we ever produced, because I was very angry about the Falklands. I was also angry about the banal way in which we were being treated. You know, we were increasingly drifting into, or being perceived as being part of the rock and roll circus. Well, when that happens, the best thing to do is do something indigestible and say, well, okay, if you can stick that, fine. And actually, the amazing thing is huge numbers of people did stick it. And that's how we grow as well, I think, you know, seeing everything as a sort of developmental challenge. Rather than seeing it as, wow, that seems to work, I'll use that. I mean, that's death, isn't it?
Somebody wants to ask a question, and I want to invite people in to ask some questions. So.
What it is did you, when you were doing all this, you said at the beginning that you wanted to do it. Did you have any expectations of your audience? Did you want them to get anything? Did you out of it?
I used to have a model audience, and that model audience was probably a sort of 13-year-old kid who lived in the Gorbals, which in those days, I don't know what they're like now, but they're a pretty shit place to live. You know, we'd played Glasgow, and I'd been pretty stunned, actually, by the experience of seeing Glasgow at that time, 30 years ago. So I set a model in my life, which is still there, actually. I can still lose tears for my friend, 13-year-old friend in the Gorbals who I never knew. And that was my standard. Would he be able to do that? What would he think of this? How much could he get from that? Not money. What? So if there was an expectation, then that he was my model, this little kid. Which isn't to say, you know, obviously, my language develops, my ideas develop, etc., but always, that was the kid who'd got nothing. That's who I've got to meter myself by. And he's still around. He hasn't grown up. He's Peter Pan. So yes, I did have an expectation, and that expectation is that I would be treated with the same, because I do believe that if you don't put yourself in the way of people, then they don't put themselves in the way of you. and that we proved time and time again. Other bands used to bring in big fat guys from rugby teams to knock people in the head. And other bands would say, no, we're not having Nazis in gigs. Well, you know, what's a Nazi? Someone who puts his hand up like that, as far as I know. They've still got a heart. And we proved time and time again that if you treated people with respect, they'd treat you with respect. You know, there was no political thing there at all. They were just desperate people coming from desperate situations who needed respect. And when you gave them respect, the respect was returned in kind. So that's the expectation, yeah.
The reason I asked that question is because, you know, my feeling is that it affected certain people because people took on board what they wanted out of it.
Mm.
I mean, I took on board something from the Big A Little List thing, which was basically, you know, live your life the way you want to live it. You know. Did you expect people to take that on board, or?
One of the things I think was beautiful about Crass, that we, you know, I think one could broadly say that it had a very broad class appeal, and generally speaking, a large number of the following was from the sort of poorer working class. You know, that was certainly the big body of the people in the front. Not once in all the years that we were on the road did I ever hear anyone saying, "Blimey, mate, you've got a bit of a funny accent," or "What's that sort of rich tart doing up on stage?" or any of that shit, you know, because we didn't come to the people with that. And I believe people believed in our sincerity. Well, I hope they. Well, I don't hope they did. I know they did.
At what point in time did being Crass or doing Crass become not enjoyable any longer?
I think it's more a question of whether or not you can maintain a vehicle to express your position, if you understand what I mean. And I think whereas initially we were able to, I think as we increasingly
diversified,
yeah,
those things, yeah.
It was very difficult to say, well, let's do a song about that. How do you do a song about such a broad spectrum of thought? I mean, eventually, I mean, we're jumping a huge bit of time here, but I mean, eventually there was a sort of quite a major conflict amongst the members of the band between sort of what activism meant, between pacifism and direct action, you know, and more than direct action, etc., etc. And that was a sort of ongoing conflict over the last 2 years that we existed as a band. Never to the degree that we were sort of getting unpleasant with each other, but, you know, I mean, it was definitely undermining our ability to sort of put together something and say, well, here you are, this is our public face, because we were losing our public face as we started to, you know, develop as individuals within the framework. For me, one of the biggest ones was the miners. We did a benefit, and I think it was our last gig for miners in Aberdare. And I just couldn't bear it, actually. I thought, what the fuck are we doing? You know, jumping up and down, you know, we're going off tonight, we've done the gig, we know, we made a nice bit of money for the fund. We bought some food down with us, but actually, what do we do? We'd become, you know, we could do anything by then. We could sort of stand on our heads and fart, and people would have still have thought it was a good gig. That sounds sort of cynical, but that's sort of what happens. People tend to stop listening. And we were trying to find ways of, you know, changing the picture, doing this, that and the other, but really against the events. We'd had the Falklands War and then the bloody miners' strike. And when I say bloody miners' strike, I mean bloody miners' strike.
Big man, big M-I-N, big man, big M-I-N, big man, big M-I-N, big man, big M-I-N, big man, J-O-K-E, big man, what fucking joke!
That was a sort of criminality that I don't think even in my sort of wildest nightmares I could have conceived of. I could understand the Falklands, but the destruction of the sort of soul of a people. I mean, I'm not great about sending people in a mile underground into fucking coal pits, but what I am profoundly supportive of is social dignity, and I think what Thatcher was doing there was destroying social dignity, and I think that was a tragedy from which we never recovered as a culture.
I've just read your autobiography, And it was around this period where you sort of, you delivered like this radical message for a number of years, pretty more extreme than any other band on the scene at the time. And then it came to this activism thing, the idea of confrontation. And you mentioned where you were going to put the call out to get people on the streets doing stuff.
Yeah.
And you held back from that.
Well, we didn't hold back with Stop the City, which we massively...
I went to one of those Stop the Cities at the time.
Well, we certainly didn't hold back to that. In
Yeah.
fact, we openly supported it and therefore drew in considerably greater body of people, and we were active in the organisation of it.
Yeah. But beyond that, that was kind of like it came to an end there.
No, it didn't.
No?
What came to an end was the public front. I mean, we at that time, during the time of Stop the City, we were planning this massive march from Sellafield, or whatever it's called. Is it called Sellafield? They keep changing the name, don't they? Going down through all the nuclear installations down to Westminster. And there was a huge volume of support for the idea. We could probably have gotten something like, between 1,000, 2,500 people out in the fields walking that walk, another Jarrow. But, I'd seen it happen at Stop the City. I could get away with it. I got age, I got experience. I never got nobbled. I remember running with a group of younger punks and thinking the best thing to do here is just stop still. So I stopped still, and the riot police just shot on past because the other ones were still running, and I just strolled off and had a cup of coffee. And that happened time and time again, and it was that, and what we realised as a body of people was that we would be actually really endangering, the physical well-being of young kids, and it would have been mostly young kids. They had got it bad enough in the City of London. Well, you put them in the middle of a field, like the bean field. Look what happened in the bean field. And by then, Thatcher was being merciless. So we just called a halt on it. And at that point, obviously, we then went underground, and some members of the band weren't interested in any case in pursuing that form of activism, and other members of the band were, and started doing their own things in what I still believe is the only way of true direct action, and that is in small, covert, silent bodies. Do what you will and don't talk about it.
I just wanted to know, and people here will know, because some people have read your book, and why it ended, why you didn't carry on with it in a way. And was it because people left, the spirit of it had gone?
Well, I think at the point, I think that one of our early songs, when I can't never really remember the words quite, but it was called Banned from the Roxy.
Banned from the Roxy, okay, I never must apply there anyway. Said I only wanted well-behaved boys, do they think guitars and microphones are just fucking toys?
That was the weaponry, the suitable weaponry, in 77 was guitars and microphones, and I believe that. Actually, the last word on that single, on that track was guns, because already the question was being asked. Okay, so for the time being it's guitars and microphones, but there's always that thing behind us, mate, is this really the way? Well, I'm not about to think guns are the way, but it certainly was a question that goes through my head often enough. You begin to wonder, don't you? What the fuck else will stop it? I think something very beautiful is happening at the moment. I think the whole DIY thing, the home sort of massive growth of things like permaculture, people really are realising they've got to get on with it themselves, and in a hurry, because there's nothing else there for us anymore, and that's beautiful. So the guns might not have to come out. No one ever wants to see that happening, but I started questioning, the whole essence of, it's all very well being pacifist as long as no one's actually about to, remove you from the scene. If you're almost there, my argument with the band was, if we're almost there, if it's just that one last push, and you saw that in the miners' strike, I think Scargill could have pushed it through, and he backed off, and I think for probably the same reasons as we backed off from our marchers. He knew he was going to get hurt, and maybe it wouldn't work, and he's absolutely right, because it wouldn't have worked, but they could have pushed through.
Would you class this upcoming Feeding the 5,000 show as theatre as well? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm outraged. I'm very sad. I dearly love Steve as well. I mean, he's an old mate. We worked together for years and years and years. But I think that's a complete denial of everything that I stood for. At one point I was going to say, do what you like, but you're not using anything that I wrote. And then I thought, and it was Eve actually said to me, well, you let everyone else do anything for free, you know, what you've done, which is true, I do. I never say no to people. So why should I say no to the one person I'd always worked with? So it was a real difficult one. So in the end, I was going to do a public statement and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I rang up Steve and said, look, Steve, I think it's absolute crap. I really love you. Have a nice evening. I won't be there. Yeah, I mean, it's crap.
That's pure theatre, that, though.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And I know what my 13-year-old Peter Pan would think about it. He's going to be fucking cross. We lived together for about another 2 or 3 years after the band folded, or we folded it, and progressively, you know, we'd be eating breakfast and wondering who the hell that was on the other side of the table. We didn't know each other because for 7 years we'd never got time to talk with each other. It was just endless. It never stopped. You know, so we'd lost any sort of knowingness of ourselves and each other. So, you know, then inevitably the next thing was just a complete crumbling of the social fabric that existed in the house. And I think I was on my own again. This time I didn't mind so much. I took to writing because I didn't want to work with. I was actually so disillusioned at what happened at the end of Crass that I thought I'm never going to work with people again in my life. Because it was that usual funny old thing where people, the sort of mummy and daddy thing, you know, if you don't work it out with your parents, you start, you know, fucking other people up with it, you know. And I felt, you know, maybe it's a bit arrogant of me, but I felt I was getting a bit of that stuff happening, and I didn't need it and didn't want it. So I really sort of became quite reclusive for a very long time. Just writing. Other people of the band, you know, one of them helps run a bookshop, one of them got involved in a health food shop, Andy started painting, G went on painting, she still lives home, Eve got involved with healing and painting. You know, people were all involved in sort of some sort of creative thing. But I've never been able to be happy with doing creative things, you know. I mean, I don't know who I am when I wake up in the morning, it's a challenge. What have I got to do today, sort of thing. So I don't have the security of knowing what I am, so or what I ought to be even. And I'm not sure I even want that. Well, I don't want that security. So I was in a sort of strange psychic wilderness for quite a while. But I started going to jazz again. Started going to this jazz club in North London, getting to know the musicians, really liking what, you know, I've always loved modern jazz. I love the fact that people who possibly don't know each other seem to be able to communicate, make love with instruments in such a beautiful way, and I wanted a bit of it. I know I couldn't drum good enough for it, but I thought, well, maybe I could try my poetry with it.
Oh, America, give me your philosophers, your thinkers, your great minds, that we might fly high together above the cuckoo's nest of your insanity. Give me the madmen, the outsiders, the hustlers, the beats and the bums who you so decry. Then give me your own tired, your own poor, your own huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
It's very much, to my mind, an extension of what well, certainly what I was doing within Crass. I mean, it doesn't get the sort of response that Crass did because it's not populist. You know, it can't be in any way slotted in any sort of populist form, but I don't care about that. I mean, I think I enjoyed Crass more when we used to empty halls than when we used to fill them, so it's sort of more a continuation of that.
The music you're making now is very different. You're making jazz and you've written a couple of books.
Mm.
And tonight, you're playing across the road for us.
Mm.
So what's that going to be about?
The same thing as everything else is about. I know it sounds a bit glib, and I really apologise, you know, if any of you think it is, but I don't see any I can't see the separation. And I don't do things. I did a thing for the local radio thing this morning, and she asked the same question. I said, I don't know what I do. I don't have an agenda.
Mm.
You know, I don't see the point in travelling, you know, getting up in the morning and travelling 300 miles to say what you thought you might say the evening before, for fuck's sake. And what sort of... I didn't know who'd be here. You know, and I sort of, no, I don't know you all, but I can look at faces and try and sort of see people. So I'm talking from there, you know, and the energy I get back or not get back is what's talking. So I couldn't tell you what I might do over there either.
So I suppose the message is come along and find out, really.
Well, no, it isn't. Or just go home and have a good drink.
It's my message.